So let's talk about this guy. I mean, he had to have just said, "How you doing?" Right? I mean, that face says it all. So I want to talk about this guy, and he's a complex character to talk about. In fact, in my Nerd Out notes on today's blog, which release at 12 o'clock, give you a ton of stuff, and it's all very interesting, and there's way too much for me to unpack with you here in this setting. If you come Wednesday at noon, I can unpack some of that with you to a degree, but there's so much here. And the primary thing you need to hear is in the construction of the book of Judges, you had an amazing judge at the beginning, and it kind of went downhill a bit from there. It was like the perfect judge at the beginning, and by the time we get to Samson, it is Loserville. I mean, it's so clear. And a lot of the things that happened in Samson's life, some of the things he did, were throwbacks to some of the things that had happened before him. Like when you saw the foxes having their tails tied together and a torch put between those, and away he goes to set fields on fire. That's a nod to something that had happened many years before. So we got to keep that in mind. And when we look at this, I mean, the funny thing is I remember as a kid, I mean, this is one of those cool Bible stories that we learn. I mean, you know, he's kind of a superhero. He's got the cool hair and everything and super strength and all that. And we all remember, you know, the final scene that's what happened. But I don't remember as a kid learning just what an absolute louse this guy was. And we're supposed to see that. This judge that we have here is almost at the bottom of the barrel. In fact, he is the worst judge that's looked at. He doesn't care at all about the nation, really, except for what it's done for him. He doesn't really care about morality. He can barely spell it, let alone live it. And even though he was born under condition of a Nazirite vow, which typically was more of a short-term thing, not a lifetime thing, people would adopt the vow for a period of time, like for Lent or something like that. But his was supposed to be a lifetime thing, and he didn't give a rip about that. You're not supposed to eat any grape products. You're not supposed to touch anything dead, any dead animals, dead people, and you're not supposed to cut your hair. And, you know, he got the hair part right. But you wonder, you know, if it wasn't helping him with girls, you wonder if he would have cut that thing too. He just didn't care. He was mainly about himself. He partied it up with the Philistines, who are the arch rivals of Israel. The Jewish people hated the Philistines. It was their land that they conquered as they came in and were constantly at war with them. They hated these people back in antiquity. And that's who he wanted to go party with copious amounts of wine. He's remembered in another chapter going again into a Philistine area and hanging out with a prostitute. And it probably wasn't the only time. I mean, this guy is a piece of work. And the women that he seems to be attracted to aren't anybody from his own nation, but he goes beyond his borders. And it's just, all of it is just such a slap in the face to the people of Israel, to the Jewish people, God's people, so to speak, in covenant with God. And yet the one who's supposed to be their hero of sorts just doesn't give a rip. It's the craziest thing. Yeah, when I first read, you know, his story, I immediately thought of different people throughout my life, leader types who were clearly unbelievably egocentric, you know, kind of to the nth degree. And some of those were teachers who just were all about themselves and just thought they were the best teacher ever and let it go to their head. I thought about, you know, I was in theater, so I thought about some drama directors I've been under. Not Sharon Rogers over there, of course, but others. I thought about choral directors that I've been under who were, you know, particularly the school ones weren't so bad, but when I'd make it into Allstate or something like that, some of the directors that they would bring in, their egos would just be massive, and it was just really, really hard to take sometimes. I thought about some coaches that, for our little terrible football team, but, one of the coaches just thought he was incredible. I'm like, dude, we're terrible. You really shouldn't be feeling this good about our team. I thought about bosses that I've had over the years doing different kinds of jobs. I thought about other pastors I know that, we see this on a grand scale sometimes. In fact, some are infamous because their egos get so big, and then they feel like Samson, like rules don't apply to them, and affairs happen, and embezzlement happens, and down they come crashing. And we're all familiar with those kinds of stories. People who are just so focused on gratifying themselves that they really don't care who they hurt along the way, because it's all about them. That's the point of it. But the funny thing for Samson and Israel was Samson was their louse. And the Jewish people found themselves in a weird tension. Because on the one hand, they felt safe with this louse leader. And the reason they felt safe was this guy was a one-man army, and they knew it, and everybody knew it. Nobody could defeat him. And so, one of the stories, the one with the jawbone, wiped out 1,000 people with the jawbone of a donkey. I mean, just utterly decimated them. Oh, that's another thing, by the way. If you cross this guy, Samson, you are toast. It's not going to be an eye for an eye. No. He's going to take both your eyes and your limbs and your family's limbs. That's the kind of guy he was. Real justice, forget it. This guy doesn't care about justice. You do something to him, the revenge is coming back tenfold on you. He was a bully. He was a tough guy, talked tough and backed it up with his muscle. And in a weird way, that gave the Jewish people a little bit of solace. Because they knew as long as Mr. Tough Guy was blurting out his stuff and flexing his muscle when he wanted to or needed to, they were probably going to be safe. And so they were willing to kind of give in on it and kind of look the other way at Samson's lousiness. And not only that, some of his recklessness probably paid off economically for them. For instance, there was this, like I mentioned, the tying the foxtails together and attaching a torch, lighting it, and just letting them go crazy in the fields of the Philistines. Well, that is not going to help the crop that year for the Philistines. They just lost a whole vintage of wine, and they just lost their grain. Well, what are they going to do? Where are they going to get grain? Ta-da! There's Israel with goods to sell. So economically, it was kind of working out for them, and they felt pretty okay that way. And so nobody really said a whole lot. Nobody wanted to say much because they were so afraid of what might happen if they did. Even that scene that the video showed where the Philistines basically asked the Israelites to hand over their own guy, and Samson was like, well, just don't kill me. And they're like, we wouldn't dare. We are terrified of you. We are operating in fear here, and so just please don't kill us. And so at least he had horse sense enough to honor that, and he didn't kill the Israelites for binding him up, but he certainly let the Philistines have it. This is the kind of person that we're talking about here. So I've had teachers that are kind of like that. Nobody wanted to say anything. Pastors I've known like that. Nobody wanted to say anything or do anything about it. Coaches, directors of different kinds, bosses, etc. And I hear sometimes people like this hold government offices as well at different levels. In fact, my father-in-law says that if you're going to run for any high office, you have to be a megalomaniac. Your ego has to be that big. That's probably true. It's easy, isn't it, to pick on a guy like Samson? He makes it easy. The book of Judges actually invites it. That's what they want us to do. The authors who put together the book of Judges want us to look at Samson's life and say, good grief. How is this guy getting away with? Who is that? Why? Lots of questions. And that's exactly what Israel was doing with this story. Because they recognized that it was part of a larger story about the decline of the keeping of the covenant of the Israel people themselves. Don't lose that about what's happening in the trajectory of the whole book. Because essentially, the people of Israel were okay with Samson as their leader. As bad, as unethical, as lousy as he was. And that says something about them. Samson, in a sense, then, became a mirror for the Israelite people, the Jewish nation. That there was something about them that is reflected in this horribly corrupt leader that they couldn't look away from. Now, you've heard me say this before, but, anytime we point a finger at somebody, we've got three pointing right back at us, right? Which is why I've mastered the 5-point pointing mechanism. Now, you can take my online course and learn not only do the 5-finger point technique, but you can also add the left hand, and now you've got 10 fingers to point at everybody else and all their problems. And we're all really, really good at this. Jesus talked about the Pharisees who are really good at recognizing the little speck, the sliver in somebody else's eye, and yet they had a log in their own. This book, this story, was to help the people of God recognize the log in their own eye. By the time you get to the end of the story, something so horrific happens that it is grotesque, it's beyond speaking about. It involves cutting up a corpse and sending pieces of that corpse to different tribes so that they'll all look at themselves and say, what have we done here? Who have we become? And that's exactly what Israel was supposed to do as they were coming to grips with the fact of who their leader was. What does it say about our covenant keeping, they would ask. What does it say about our slide? That over time we've accepted these two things which we feel pretty good about, but there's been a slide of the covenant that has been shared by everybody. Easy to blame Samson. It's always easy to blame the leader and point the finger at him, but the leader gets to be the leader because of the people allowing him to remain the leader. And so you have a group of people that are complicit in the very behavior they are despising. And that makes this story for all of us a time for us to take stock as individual people and wonder, who are we? And as we're maybe quick to judge other people for who they are and what we see wrong in them, are we really willing to take the magnifying glass and look at ourselves? We're offering this course on the Enneagram next Sunday with Stephen's leadership, and he's a big Enneagram nerd. I'm an Enneagram nerd. He's even a bigger Enneagram nerd than I am, I think. I think that's safe to say, which is a compliment, really, yeah. You know what the Enneagram really helps you do? It helps you see yourself. There's nothing magic about it. It's just a personality test. It's been around for a very long time. But because it's been around for a very long time, it stood the test of time, and a lot of people have found value in it. The thing is this: if we are not aware about how we see the world, the paradigms that we see the world through, we are going to be handcuffed to a perspective that is not allowing us to see more. The thing with Samson is he had a particular worldview because of his giftedness, his strength, and all that stuff, and all that. He had a very, very narrow, jaded, selfish-oriented view of the world. And so he behaved like it. There was nobody to hold him accountable. Even if he had ears to hear it, nobody would dare. And he probably wouldn't have listened anyway. And so as he went through his life, covenant schmovenant. Who cares about what? Well, I don't even know what that is anymore. So why would I care if I go visit a prostitute of the Philistines? Why would I care if I want to get married to a Philistine? Well, what difference does it make? It's because in his worldview, it's just about him. It's just about his lust. It's just about to gratify his own needs and desires. And I'm telling you that we are all prone to do the same thing on different scales if we're not paying attention to who we are, to who we've become, and constantly ask the question, who do we want to be? Because the Enneagram kind of gives us the full picture of that. And you'll be surprised, and take it all with a grain of salt, but as you understand where you line up on the thing and what type you are, you'll be surprised that the way you see the world is reflected in your type. And it gives us warning signs. Say, hey, this is really working for you over here, but beware of this blind spot, because it will really come and bite you hard if you're not aware of it. And it always does. You know, Samson's also so easy to pick on because he's just larger than life. He makes these colossal mistakes. They're the only, we don't know anything about Samson except for these blunders that he makes. That's the way history is remembering him. But did you know that he was actually a brilliant chef and a fantastic gardener and was great at training dogs? I have no idea if any of those things are true. I just made that all up. But the point is we don't know about any of those other things. And the same is true with you. You and I, we tend to focus on, well, if we're paying attention, we might even focus on the negative things that we have about us and feel terrible guilt and shame about, oh, I wish I could just get rid of this, and I'm so focused on this. But 90% of your life may be wonderful. It may be terrific. You may be a great employee. You may be a great spouse. You may be a great parent, but you've got this thing here. And sometimes we focus so much on the 90% that is healthy in our lives, all those different areas, that we miss the percentage that's not, that's actually robbing us of life. Sometimes we do it unwittingly, because we look at our life as a whole and we're like, hey, I'm getting an A-, pretty good, not bad. And sometimes we do it either in conscious or unconscious denial. Like, yeah, we know that 10%'s there. We know we have trouble with that addictive behavior. We know we've got an anger problem. Yeah, I know that I'm full of myself. I know that I tell people in terrible ways how wrong they are. I know I over-intellectualize. I know I'm always the chicken little in the group talking about different fears. I know I'm kind of a doormat and I let people walk all over me. I know I'm a perfectionist here and there and cause problems. I know I'm kind of go by my own beat of my own drummer and don't pay any attention to anybody else. But I'm not going to pay attention to those because 90% of my life is just fine. By the way, I just gave you the 9 areas of these little percentage areas that we may have trouble with, depending on who you are. Perfectionism, over-helping to the point of manipulation, egocentricity, thinking that you are so special that rules don't apply to you, over-intellectualizing, being too afraid of your world and your life, seeking pleasure too much of the experienced reality, always telling everybody else how off they are, and being a doormat. 90% of your life may be great, but these other variables could be not only hurting you, they could be hurting other people. And my guess is that they're probably not congruent with what the Spirit of God is trying to do in your life. My friends, Samson. We are all Samson. What will be written of us about what we really value? Who do we want to be? What are we aspiring to? Are you on autopilot? I know you're thinking to yourself, boy, I'm really glad the person next to me is here to hear this day because they really need it. I want you to realize that you are the person sitting next to them, that they are thinking, this person really needs to hear this. This is for all of us. We're all human beings. This is all an experience and all an experiment of this life thing together, and we've all been thrown different variables. I'm asking you, if we all have the propensity towards Samson living, are we even wanting to pay attention to it? Are we even looking to see if we're still following true north or in the footsteps of Jesus? Or have we settled? Have we settled for a couple of variables because we feel safe, we got enough money, so we're comfortable, so we're going on forward and it's going to be just fine, but to the neglect of so many other things in your life? You know, there is a beautiful piece about this story, which I didn't really think about until I was reading the commentators on this week. Something that's so obvious right in front of our faces. So he finally, Samson finally tells Delilah what the deal is. Why? I mean, she has shown no reason to trust her at all, but he's just that dumb. So he decides, well, okay, I can trust you now somehow, or stop the nagging or whatever. Didn't think she'd actually, I don't know what, who knows. But anyway, he gets his hair cut. And that's the final straw. And the covenant is absolutely broken, and somehow, I mean, don't think too hard about this, just take it at face value. Okay, covenant's really, really broken now, and he's now a slave. But you know the crazy thing that happened? His hair grew back. Isn't that amazing? You know, I think the last time I taught on Samson, which was, I don't know, had to be 15 years ago, I actually got my hair cut on stage, just to help people remember. Anybody remember that? I had Linda Smetzer, not Linda Smetzer. Who? Suzanne Smetzer, yeah. I had her actually buzz my hair that day on stage. She is a professional hairdresser person, and so I went from whatever length it was, totally buzzed, and kind of did a dramatic thing with that. Then after it happened, my wife was so happy with me, but her response to me after every bad haircut that I, don't tell the person exactly what I want to say high fade and I get a high and tight instead. It's not looking right anymore. Her response is always, well, it'll grow back. It'll grow back. You'll get another shot at it in a couple, 3 months. Yeah, it seems like such a simple thing. But it's really a beautiful thing. Samson's hair grew back. He got a second shot. Part of the story that, from our perspective, is beautiful. He becomes humble, admits it, finally asks what God's opinion is, and asks if he could do something, to something that is more God-oriented. And he gets his wish. He's the only character in the Old Testament that essentially asks to die, and he gets his wish granted. It's interesting stuff. That's a whole different kind of tension to think about. It's hard for us to recognize this because, not just that part, but to recognize any kind of nobility in this, because the way he chooses to go out is one more awful case of destruction. So he wants to ruin this temple of a foreign god and wipe out the however many thousands of people that might be there. And you're just like, well, did he really learn anything at all? And for that piece, you just got to take it with a grain of salt and just say, well, the Israelites, they would only have looked at this as a positive thing because they hated the Philistines' people and they wanted to annihilate false gods. And so you just let it be what it is. But man, in our day and age, if Samson were among us and prayed for something, what would we say to Samson? Go destroy some more people? No, we'd say as Jesus people, we'd say, hey, how can we heal some relationships? How can we sow into cooperation? How can we build some bridges that need to be mended? How can we look at some ills in our world that you could help address in some more substantive ways? That would smell like a breakthrough. What would it be for you? Because your hair does grow back, even if your actual scalp doesn't suggest that. Your hair grows back. There's always a second chance. God is always there to redeem, always there to restore, renew, help us go forward. What's your hair for you? What's it mean for you? Where's the do-over thing for you in your life right now? What do you know needs to be addressed so that you can actually ask for God's help to address it? You know, communion, what you have at your table, really is all about this idea of forgiveness and redemption. And just to, kind of play with two different modes of thinking about this, on the one hand, we look at this as, the bread is a symbol of broken body. Grab the elements, by the way, because I want to talk about these, and we're going to take communion. It's open to all of you, any of you. You don't have to sign off on any covenant or anything like that. But, the way we think about this with the substitutional atonement theory is that when Jesus died on a cross, it became the final sacrifice forevermore. So we look to that and we remember we're still loved by God no matter what. For some of us, the sacrificial language doesn't really work for us. It doesn't resonate with us at all anymore. And so maybe the better thing for us in that is while Jesus is sitting there or up there dying on a cross, there's another guy also dying on a cross who is a convicted thief, an insurrectionist actually. And that guy recognized in Jesus the work of God and asked if Jesus would remember him after they died. And Jesus says, you're going to be with me today in paradise, which is its own statement of forgiveness. And so when we think about that broken body of Jesus and what was communicated writ large on the cross, it's forgiveness, it's grace, it's love for you, even though that you can't undo. It's just there. I love that line and how he loves us. If grace were an ocean, we'd all be sinking. That's nothing to be terrified about. That's like, no, you can't find the depths of it. Better to wade in it, better to tread in it, better to soak in it, better to go deep, because that's what this represents. But this also represents something else. This broken body symbol of the bread and the blood and the cup represents humanity who put Jesus on a cross in the first place. It represents the systems of power that put Jesus on the cross, and it represents the people who allowed those systems in power to stay that way. And therefore we are all complicit. And when we take the bread, not only do we remember that what was communicated by Jesus was forgiveness, but we recognize that we, as the human race, killed him. The best among us. We did it, and we still do. To take communion, to take to take this bread, is to admit two things. One is that by the grace of God, we have a shot. There's redemption. But it's also to recognize that we have a need for redemption. So if you're tracking with me and if the Spirit is resonating with this with you, take and eat the bread. And likewise the cup. Symbol of shed blood. Grape juice is called the blood of the grape. So that's why we use grape juice. So it reminds us again, this guy suffered and he did it silently. The reason why he was silent the whole way is because he's like, for all the people to see as he was arrested, as he was beaten beyond recognition, as he was carrying his cross as far as he could, as he's nailed to the cross, he's quiet, as if to say to the whole human race and the leaders who used them to put him up there, look at what's happening here. I am innocence. You know who I was. I was here to heal. I was here to teach. I was here to guide. I was here to stretch you, to show you the way to be in relationship with God. And humanity has done this to me. Look at what you are capable of. And yet, you will still be with me in paradise. And so we have a twofold thing to remember with this cup, that we are complicit to the ills that we see in the world today, to the problems in our own lives. We have a role in all of them. And in God, we have grace sufficient. Take and drink. Would you join me in prayer? So God, as we close out this morning, help us not forget Samson. And as we want to highlight everything bad and evil and stupid and awful about Samson, and there are many, and as we might even correlate those to people in our past or present, help us, God, to be quick to recognize our own Samson tendencies, that we are fully capable of being the worst of ourselves. So give us courage, God. Give us grace. Give us strength. Give us the grace to be a little lighter on ourselves than we probably are being. Help us to be sensitive and forgive ourselves where we need to. Lord, help us remain humble. Help us act with justice, loving mercy, and walking with you in humility every step of the way. Be with us, God, as we grow forward together. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you had a great experience. Next week, we look at the character of Ruth. So if you want to read that book, it's a phenomenal story. You're welcome to read that. And my friend Laurel Morrison is going to be teaching with us then. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next week.